Okay. Good evening, everybody. There's just a few more people I need to let into the room. Good evening, everyone. We are absolutely delighted because we've got Miranda, who, of course, is such a valued member of Sabeel-Kairos UK, but also one of our trustees, joining us tonight to share about her recent trip to Palestine just before Christmas. And also to actually give us an update. You've got quite a lot of updates to share with us as well, haven't you, since your return, Miranda? So we're delighted to have her here with us tonight. We're really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. I'm sure it will be challenging, heart-wrenching, painful, probably all sorts of emotions it's going to bring to the table. But I would like to welcome you, Miranda, and yeah, take it away.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm sorry about the frog in my throat if I keep clearing my throat. Before I begin, just a bit of, I'll screen share actually straight away, if I may. Right. So just a brief introduction about myself. My mother was a secular Jewish refugee from the Sudetenland in 1938 and was always against what was being done in her name as a Jew to the Palestinians. Because of that, I have been very active in support of Palestinian human rights since 2009, when I spent 3 months in Hebron in the West Bank as a human rights observer. I was not brought up as a Jew, but I'm proud of my heritage. Conflating the actions of the State of Israel with Judaism is, I believe, the greatest anti-Semitism. I traveled in the occupied territories with, why isn't it going on? Ah, sorry, I'm trying to get the screen to move on. Oh, there it is. I traveled in the occupied West Bank last November with Sabeel Jerusalem. It's got rather this long name. And I'm a trustee of Sabeel-Kairos UK, so was representing them on this solidarity visit. I also support a Muslim family in Gaza and have done so for years. I'm in daily contact with one member of the family, and they're currently living in the ruins of Khan Yunis. Sending them money is difficult without any banks or infrastructure, but I do have a way of getting cash to them, thankfully. Since being there last November, the situation has changed and moved on. There may be a ceasefire in Gaza, but there is not one in the West Bank. And one of Trump's first actions was to remove any sanctions on Israeli settlers who have been increasingly violent well before the 7th of October 2023. They now have even greater impunity to destroy Palestinian property and to dispossess and harm the Palestinians living in the West Bank, and often armed and supported by the Israeli government. Right, the first and most important, well, one of the most important things to say is that we really did not go into Israel at all, except when we traveled to Sderot on the borders of Gaza. We came in via the Allenby Bridge, or the King Hussein Bridge, directly from Jordan into the West Bank. And you can see from the map the places we visited. There's Nablus, Ramallah, Jericho, East Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Hebron, that you can see there with the red lines. And then the black lines take you to the same place. It's Sderot on the northern corner of Gaza, which is in Israel. So that was the only time we actually entered Israel. I've had so many people say to me after I got back, how about your trip to Israel? And I had to say, I actually didn't go to Israel. All those places are under occupation, except for Sderot. So we approached the King Hussein Bridge on the Jordan side, and you can see the huge number of lorries all queued up. And you can imagine that if that many lorries were queued up then, and all the lorries queued up on every crossing to get into the West Bank, there were, drivers sitting having picnics. I don't know how long they were there for, but we were very fortunate because there was another way in, and the driver took us round. And as we crossed, you can see what's left of the Jordan River, which is a rather sad. What's left of it's rather sad looking. It looks like a muddy brook. As we arrived in the West Bank, I think probably the thing that struck us straight away was that almost every hilltop, or everywhere we looked, had an illegal settlement at the top of it. You can see a small one to the top left, which was a typical settlement that's growing up, and a huge one of Har Homa overlooking Bethlehem on the right. There's no escape from that when you're in Bethlehem. It seems to look at you from wherever you are. And of course, that's only got worse and is getting worse. This is a typical dual carriageway created for Israelis, and mostly for Israelis only. There are sections that the Palestinians can use, but most of this highway is produced or created to help Israelis avoid the existence of any Palestinians. So you have it going on the right-hand side, you see this dual carriageway go into a tunnel underneath a Palestinian village. You see the huge barrier as the highway goes down towards it. And you can see the sort of areas that it is going over towards a major settlement. This is an area, a Palestinian area beneath that highway. And the Palestinians who live here have land on the other side of that wall. And if you look in the bottom right-hand corner picture, there is what's called an agricultural gate. They were promised, of course, as they would be, that would be opened most of the time. And of course, over the years, it's closed more and more. And in the last year, it's been barely open at all, which means they cannot get to their farmland, their olive groves, or anything else. And when Palestinians cannot reach their land, there's always the danger that Israel will decide it's state land and offer it to settlers. And here, Al-Makhra Valley, which is the road is traversing, right in the center of it, you can see a small Israeli settlement. This bit of land was owned by a Palestinian family. I think they had a cafe or restaurant there, and the settlers just took it. There's no compensation, nothing. They just lose anything they've got, and there's no recompense. There's nothing they can do about it. And of course, the threat now is that the whole area will be annexed, in which case it'll be as good as lost to the Palestinians entirely. And this is well, as you can see, it's one of the last two remaining green and recreational spaces for Palestinians. Now, this was one of the updates I've got. You can see the top two pictures are ones I took. The bottom one isn't. On the top right, you can see an orange gate. Now you see these gates all over the place. They are orange, yellow, red. And what they do is they block off the Palestinian roads leading to villages and stop them for entering the network of roads designed for the Israeli settlers. And there are all sorts of things that go along with these roads, the infrastructure. But it means that the Palestinians have to travel a long way around to get to and from their villages. And from the Middle East Monitor today, which is why I included it, the Israeli occupation forces have erected 898 military checkpoints and gates so far in 2025. I mean, just imagine that. So it's become increasingly difficult for Palestinians to go anywhere. The reason I included the picture of the top left is because even tourist sites are just shut for no apparent reason. And when we were in Bethlehem, even then, we arrived for a Jewish festival with the main checkpoint shut. And for the rest of the time, it closed for no apparent reason, meaning that we had to travel long distances, which is inconvenient for us, but much worse for them. And here, there are no planning permissions, of course. If Israel wants to widen a road, they widen it. And they take the land from the Palestinians. And you can see here one of the highways being widened. And in the bottom two pictures, you see the sort of roads that the Palestinians are left with. Traveling the back roads, there's a lorry on the left-hand side one you can see. The wear and tear on vehicles must be tremendous, apart from all the waiting involved and the long journeys. We spent 1 week in Bethlehem and the other week in Jerusalem, and we traveled around from both. And some of you will know about WIAM, which is the Conflict Transformation Center, and it's right next to the wall. Now, the wall, it's interesting, the Israelis, of course, call it the separation barrier or security, whereas the Palestinians call it the annexation wall, because it was built inside the West Bank. 85% of it is actually inside the West Bank. So it's actually taking Palestinian land. And one of the shocking things we learnt, you can see a playground down there, the WIAM playground. And I knew from before that there was a lot of tear gas, but I did not know that this is one of the most tear gassed places in the whole world. I mean, that is shocking. This is Bethlehem. You don't imagine that. And not only tear gas, but we were told that the Israeli military also used skunk water, even within places like Bethlehem. And it's a disgusting liquid that clings to skin, clothes, buildings, cars, everything. And you can't even wash it out. In fact, if you wash it, it gets worse. And if you finally think you've got rid of the smell, if you go through a checkpoint or a terminus or something, Israel can actually it can trigger alarms. And although Israel says it's chemical free, that makes it seem rather unlikely that it is. And not far away from WIAM is this Anastas walled-in guest house. Now, some of you, or most of you, will have heard of the walled-off hotel, and the Banksy Hotel. And this is just a few hundred yards from there. And the story is that this was the original worst view in the world. It's still a guest house, but the house itself paid taxes on the Israeli side, and therefore they didn't actually destroy the house. Instead, they built the wall around it on 3 sides, leaving it on the Bethlehem, the West Bank side, which puts the owner in a really difficult situation. And since the creation of the Balfour Hotel, the Banksy Hotel, sorry, forgive me, she's lost trade, a huge amount of trade. And you can look up the Banksy Hotel very easily online. And I thought it was important to show this because that really is the worst view in the world. And on the bottom right, you'll see an image of Shireen Abu Akleh, Palestinian-American journalist who was shot by an Israeli sniper in Jenin a few years ago. And we were traveling with with a niece of hers. And in fact, the people we were traveling were friends of her family. And we were told a terrible story about a 5-year-old daughter of one of our leaders who was rather gleeful when she was told about the death of an Israeli settler with her daughter at a checkpoint. And they couldn't understand why a non-violent family, a Christian family, why the child was pleased at the death of anyone. And of course, this child, if you probably gathered from what I've said, has sat in countless queues of traffic waiting at checkpoints, sometimes getting to places, sometimes not, being subject to tear gas on numerous occasions, and at the particular funeral, which in fact was all over the news at the time, where the Israeli forces came in and she saw her father being beaten up by the Israeli forces. You'd have to ask, you know, who's teaching such children to hate? It was a very useful, interesting and useful story and worth pondering on. So because we were with a Christian group, we went with Sunday morning service. We went to the Melkite service in Bethlehem. And this is the same church I went to in 2009, where I spent Christmas. So I was quite pleased to be back there. The congregations are getting smaller and smaller in all the churches. Usama of Wiam said that 60 Christian families have already left Bethlehem in the past year, and many more are planning to leave. And that's just Bethlehem. So the number of Christians left in the so-called Holy Land is shrinking at an alarming pace. And there was the mother of 3 of these children who said to me on the way out that she was terrified that soon, not only would she need a permit to visit Jerusalem, which they really have problems getting at all now, that she'd need a permit just to leave Bethlehem, and that Bethlehem would become like a prison. And in fact, when we went to Nablus, we learned that Nablus already was very much hemmed in, and it was difficult for students and others to get in and out. And of course, one of the sad updates I've got is that it has got a lot worse, even now. And there are many, many checkpoints around Bethlehem, a huge number of new checkpoints preventing people from free movement in the West Bank. So this woman's fears are actually coming true right now. The other thing, we were told, I think I was told yesterday or today, that somebody did a trip down to Jericho. And instead of taking 3/4 of an hour or an hour and a half, I think it was, it took 18 hours because there are so many checkpoints, new checkpoints that have sprung up just this year. So whereas we were inconvenienced in our trips around the West Bank and often had to take longer routes, I think were we to go now, it would take a lot longer still. I mean, very many hours just to travel very short distances. We went to a town, a little village actually, called Teba, which is the only village left that is uniquely Christian. It's also known for its beer. So many of the party did enjoy drinking their beer. But the idea was that we were meeting up with rabbis for human rights in order to pick olives with the villagers. And you can see the olive grove. Unfortunately, the IDF came and made one area after another a closed military zone. And so no olives could be picked that day, and we all had to leave. Even a French diplomat who arrived to pick olives in solidarity had to leave. And of course, not only is it terrible for their livelihoods, because many of the olives don't get picked at all, but there is the danger, as always, as I mentioned before, that the land can then be confiscated because it's not being used, and settlements can be built on it. Now, this is a Christian village, and I think, you know, although we shouldn't talk about the Christians as any different from others. Sometimes just saying to people, I don't think everybody realizes that there are Christians there, and that there is such a thing as a uniquely Christian village, but that they are having exactly the same problems as their Muslim neighbours. They are all in it together. They are all suffering together. We travelled to the Tent of Nations. Again, a lot of you will know of the Tent of Nations. It is a property owned by a Christian family on a hilltop. They had quite a lot of land, or had quite a lot of land. They've got documents going back to the Ottoman period, and they've been in the courts for the past 30 years trying to get the Israeli courts to agree that they have ownership of the land. In the meantime, the Israeli authorities never ever grant them planning permission, but they do supply demolition orders, and that includes structures for storing water. So luckily they have caves, and they use those caves for accommodation and meeting rooms. And the gates, you can see, there were huge numbers of padlocks and security on those gates because they get invaded by settlers. And in fact, in the news again, just a few years ago, about 3 years ago or less, I don't know, they had fruit trees coming into ripe fruit, and Israeli bulldozers just bulldozed the whole lot and buried them. So they don't have, the only recourse they have, because they are non-violent, is with the courts. And of course, that doesn't help very much. So here in this picture, you can see on the top left, the edge of an Israeli settlement, which is right against their land. And that is a school that the settlement has built. And actually on their land, you can see a caravan and I suppose a shipping container or something, a shed of some sort, and the makings of a road, all built by settlers. And there's absolutely nothing they can do about it except take the situation to court, and it's heavily weighted against them. So while it's going through the courts in order to try and get proof of ownership, of course, bit by bit, the settlers are taking their land. We next went down to Hebron, and it's a long story, and I'm not going to go into it now. I've included a map. Hebron was divided into two areas in 1977, H1 and H2. And H2 is full of illegal settlements, and it's right in the heart of the old city of Hebron. And you can see there is an entrance in the top left-hand side with the blocks so that vehicles cannot go down there. And there's a checkpoint at the end there. And you can see we're in the jewellery market there. And you can see the sort of things that the settlers throw down, including a rather disgusting looking nappy. You can also see a soldier, member of the IDF, watching us intently. And in the top right-hand corner, you can see mesh above what's left of the Palestinian areas where there are still a few shops and things, because the settlers throw down all sorts of things, as in the jewellery market, including foul water, which of course the mesh doesn't stop. But this is in order to protect the Palestinians. Shahada Street is very well known. It's a street in H2, which goes from the Ibrahimi Mosque and along to past a place called Tel Rumeda, and it's completely closed to Palestinians. We as internationals can walk there, Jews can walk there, but Palestinians, even those living on the street, cannot even go out of their front doors onto that road. If they want to go out, they have to climb through the back of their houses, through neighbours, and go out another way. It is illegal. They get arrested if they are on that street. And you can see on the right-hand side, shops that have been closed for a very long time, Palestinian, and the state they're in, and below that, slightly more recent. And just recently again, I heard that Israel, there are a number of shops very close to the mosque, and they have been told that if they don't close voluntarily, they will be shut in the way that these shops have been forcibly shut. We went to visit Youth Against Settlements, which is an organization in Hebron, and which was founded by Issa Amro. I've known him for many years. He's a great man. He's very much he's a non-violent resistance and civil disobedience person, totally. And he's ended up in prison. He's ended up being beaten up. His marriage has come to an end because he sees human rights as rather more important than his marriage, sadly. And you can see the photograph that was taken there with him. We were split up into two groups at that point. So I think I'm the only Brit in that particular photograph. And yeah, he was one of the few who didn't mind being photographed and talking about. I think you'll find that I'm not naming names on the whole or giving photographs because right at the start we were told by several Palestinians that they really, really wanted their story shared, but they were terrified of their names or photographs being out there because they thought they would be arrested. And I think that's probably very true. The Tale of the Wooden Spoon. On our way in, at a shop like the one on the top right, one of our number bought a long-handled wooden spoon. And this is really to do with an allegory about, or a parable about heaven and hell, that heaven and hell, they all have the same feast, but in hell they can't feed themselves because of the long-handled spoons that they can't get to their mouths. And in heaven they feed each other. Well, we went through the checkpoint and the soldier there decided that he needed to confiscate both the wooden spoon and two wooden walking sticks because they could be used as dangerous weapons. Now, we did get them back, and it's become quite an interesting little tale. But again, you know, it was one of those things that was inconvenient for us and annoying. But, you know, it just makes you realise what they do to Palestinians all the time. And we got them back. I'm not sure that Palestinians would have done. And you can see down in the bottom on the right-hand side, they wouldn't actually let us out through the checkpoint until the commander had given permission, which was a surprise. I've not had that before, but it went with the territory, really. We spent a week in Jerusalem, and the most interesting thing I found in Jerusalem was that it was very quiet. You wouldn't know that there was a war on. Yes, there were very few pilgrims or tourists, but there was no real, not a big sign of hostages or demonstrations or anything, except that every night at around 10:30, 11, I could hear warplanes going overhead. And as I was on WhatsApp with Amro in Gaza at the time, that was quite difficult. And they were obviously warplanes. For a start, they weren't ordinary passenger planes going overhead. And it was the same sort of time. They sound different, I can assure you. They sound quite different. And this is, you can see here, a picture of the Armenian quarter of the old city of Jerusalem and a car park known as the Cow's Garden. Now, some years ago, somebody nefarious tried to sell some of the Armenian land, which would have affected them seriously because it included the dining hall of the seminary, private gardens and parking, and homes. And they are in the last year, they had been doing a battle through the courts. And at one point, the young people set up camp in this car park, and you can see a blockade and a pile of rubble. The pile of rubble was caused by bulldozers from settlers, and the blockade was created by the young people. So far, they're surviving. But this could be another great loss of a Christian group of people if they succeed, because it's more and more difficult for Christians to stay there. Now, this is an interesting picture. It's not the sort of thing you expect, really. One of the joys of going with Sabeel over the years, and I've been several times with Sabeel, is that you get to go into places like the Dome of the Rock, and not most people you travel with don't get you in there. And this was my third visit, and I'm not going to show you pictures of that because they're all over the internet. But the tour guide, this was his office, and we learned something new. I mean, I knew that Israel wouldn't let the Palestinians repair their properties, but I didn't know that it extended to things like this. And you can see the broken plug socket, the damaged window. Israel will not allow maintenance or repair of these sites. And I'm not just talking about the mosque, the Al-Aqsa area. I'm talking about all religious sites and Palestinian homes as well. The system of getting permits and permission is so great, it's almost impossible. And then we went into the Al-Aqsa Mosque itself. And again, about 18 months ago, there was a raid, an Israeli raid there, and they fired guns in there. And you can see in the top right-hand corner, beautiful glass windows that were shattered, a window above the door, a door in one of the rooms, totally destroyed, and they're not allowed to repair them. And that's why I'm showing them, because it's part of the situation. I think Israel imagines that if they don't allow any repairs to these things, eventually they'll fall down, but I think it'll take a while. Then we ventured into Israel, and we went, as we traveled south, we started to see more images of the hostages, the yellow chairs. Yellow is the color. Each hostage has a chair. There are yellow flags, you can see, and the cars have yellow ribbons attached to them. You can see in the bottom right a ribbon on that car. And as we went further towards Gaza, these signs increased. We went to a place called Thorot. I've been there once before in 2009 as an ecumenical accompanier. It was rather different then, but I can't go into that as well. But we again met a member of Rabbis for Human Rights. His name is Avi Dabush, and also a woman called Ronnie Keda, a member of Other Voice, and they both lived very, very close to the border of Gaza, and told us of their experiences of the 7th of October 2023 and how traumatic they were. And I'm always very impressed with Rabbis for Human Rights. They really care about the Palestinians, and they understand that you can't keep people as sort of third-class citizens and imprison them. And I admire that organization tremendously. Ronnie, before the 7th of October, she said that her intent was to make the life for those in Gaza better. So I think what she said at the time was that she helped to supply musical instruments and other things to improve living conditions. And we asked her questions. I asked her a question about what would have happened if the 7th of October hadn't happened, and was that sustainable to keep all these people in Gaza for all that, continually. And she said that she was terribly worried about them getting out. And someone else, thankfully, not me, pointed out that if you keep a bird in a cage and just feed it a little bit, a few tidbits to keep it happy, it's not going to be happy and it'll try and break out. It was very, very interesting to talk to her and to see that sort of mindset. Make them a bit more comfortable, but don't set them free. And the viewpoint you can see on the top right was actually paid for by the USA. And while we were there, Israeli school children arrived, and some of them were quite upset that there weren't any bombs dropping at that moment, which is also a little sad. So this is the closest we got to Gaza. We were told that the white smoke is caused by demolitions. Grey smoke is by missiles. So what you can see there are demolitions, bulldozers and other things destroying homes, the homes that have been left after the bombs. If you look carefully from the picture, it's quite difficult because it's a bit hazy and it's as close as I could get. It is all ruins. There isn't much there. In the bottom picture, you can see the barrier road on the north of Gaza, and the barrier fence and everything. We couldn't get any closer than that. And then UNRWA. As you know, UNRWA, which was accused of having members of Hamas amongst it. And for a short while, in this country, for a short while, funds to UNRWA stopped, and yet they're the only agency who can really help people in Gaza and much of the West Bank. And 3 laws were passed in the Knesset. The first to designate them a terrorist organization along with other human rights. And we did meet, this is only a fraction of what we did, I have to say, along with other human rights organizations who've all been designated as terrorist organizations, which of course affects funding and all sorts of things. This is also to rescind all their privileges as members of the UN and to stop all their operations in areas controlled by Israel, including Area C of the West Bank, which is actually 60% of the West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza. Now, this is meant to come into force at the end of January. And I think we were all hoping beyond hope that it wouldn't happen. And although Israel cannot end their mandate, because Israel did not create their mandate, it intends to impose a no-contact policy between UNRWA and Israel and anyone coordinating with them. So to have a no-contact policy means that they can't access a bank to get their money. They can't get their vehicles insured or maintained. It basically prevents them operating. And there is nothing that can replace them. So if Israel goes through with this, and quite honestly, based on Trump's latest pronouncements, the fear is that in return for the ceasefire, whether that holds or not, Trump has not only taken away any sanctions on Israeli settlers, which means that there's an awful lot of violence. There was violence before the 7th of October, and there's even more violence now, with a danger, huge danger, that the whole place will be annexed with Trump's blessing. And it's a terrible prospect. And then questions.